Hello lovely people, I'm K3N and welcome to the second part of the Crazy Patchwork project. Here is my homework. I had a little go on, not the one I made on camera last week, but, well, partly because here's the grandmother's fan that I made. So I've done lots of embellishing. I hope the light's good. I'm outside on the terrace. Sunny finally. So I did some of the basic stitches that I showed in the bonus video at the weekend along the seam lines. I did some couching here, and then I went to town with French knots everywhere and lazy daisies everywhere, and then I put some beads on. I made some little yo-yos. Can you see? Hope you can see. I made some little yo-yos and clustered them together with some buttons and some beads, a bit of lace trap behind. And on my little spider's web, look away if you're an arachnophobe. Can you see? I made a little spider out of a bead and then just some straight stitching. So that's what I did in advance. It's very, very, very time consuming. How I felt about it, I wouldn't want to do it all the time because of all the choices you have to make as you go along. You know, you have to select the stitches, the colours, whether you're going to use beads, whether you're going to use buttons or the embellishments. I had to, after I'd done a session, go back to a bit of running stitch on a piece I'm working on for a little bag, just to kind of, phew, you know. But each to their own, I guess, you know. I mean, I think you can do this in the slow stitch way, being aware of your choices and the process and so on. It's just different, and a change is as good as a rest, as they say. And the other thing I want to show you before I get into the stitching is the cushions, because I mentioned the cushions that weren't fit to be seen. It's not this one, this is an old cushion that's faded. I thought it would make a reasonable backdrop. The cushions are just here, the old crazy cushions that have disintegrated to nearly nothing. I'm ashamed to show you. But anyway, Jerry, you asked, so here we go. Can you see? I mean, you see here, the fabric's completely gone. I do actually like them. I do kind of feel inspired to embellish them in some way. Here is a little bullion knot rose in this corner, a silk ribbon rose. Here's, again, arachnophobes, look away. Here's another spider on his web. I hope it's showing up. But you see my grandmother's fan here. Well, there's only this piece left, this cotton. The rest is just gone. There you go. They're not even that old, they've just been outside. Well, you know, undercover, but outside. And the other one, excuse my arm, I have to reach it. Sorry, ducking under the camera. The other one has fared slightly better, but it's still... I think they're about 25 years old, you know, so they're not antique by any means. This is nice, this little patch here, with this cluster, again with, I think, bullion knots, French knots, and then some sort of straight stitches. And here I think this was a little dragonfly in the corner here. So yeah, so that's my my manky old crazy quilt cushions. Poor things, I think they need some love. So now let's get into the stitching for this week. A little bit of stitching. All I've done is some of the stitches that I showed you in the video about the stitches, you know what I mean, just to get me started. So I've done some, let me point with something that's not my finger, my snippy fiskers. I've put a new little charm, well, it's not new, I just found it. It's a little silver sewing machine. So I did some feather stitch, get you out the way, in the dark purple. I'm just trying to hold it up so it doesn't go blurry. In the dark reddish purple, all the way through that long seam there. Do you see? So I did a feather stitch. I sort of did 2 stitches one way, 1 the other, 2 that way. I didn't do it regularly, I just did, just so it looked more sort of natural. And then along this seam I did herringbone in the gold here. Do you see that? And then along this seam here I couched this little bit of wool right up in against the seam, because it was quite a big jump, I think, because the velvet was pushing it all up. So I just sort of levelled that valley out, if you like, by couching that bit of wool down. I did some Cretan stitch along here in the greenish gold, and then I did some fly stitch down the purple there in the green. So I've just started doing this blanket stitch here, and so I've turned the camera on to show you. because what I'm doing is I'm graduating it. So you see I've gone up along this side, and I started with a little one, medium one, big one, medium one, little one, and then medium big, medium little. Do you see what I mean? So I'm just going to mirror that on the other side. So I'm going to do a little one opposite this little one. So just, you know, normal blanket stitch. I'm trying to keep my hands down and out of the way, and of course I've got my long thread for the lazy girl. Totally unnecessary. So I'm just laying the two little crossbars up against each other. It's crazy, you know, you don't need to be super pernickety about it. Just apparently it makes me be more precise, which is interesting. Excuse me. Isn't it? Well, you know, it's interesting to me. Well, it's excuse me, I talk about it a lot. It's part of the Slowstitch ethos to notice things while you're stitching, to me. It's part of the mindfulness of it. And that's what I've observed, that piece that I showed you at the beginning, the crazy piece, that I'm being kind of small and precise with it. Whereas in my normal work, you know, my usual style of work, I'm not small and precise at all. So there's a little one. So what it's going to make is kind of these oval shapes. And I see all these seam embellishing stitches just as a something to get you started. I mean, you could just embellish a seam and then, you know, with a row of stitching, and then go straight in and start working into that stitching with other things. It's just different ways of working. You have to see what suits you. This is a long one again. Or you could go all over all the seams. You could even just choose one stitch. A lady in the comments talked about a quilt that she's seen, an antique quilt. Whoops, watch your tension, Catherine. That just had feather stitch all over every seam. And I quite like the sound of that. In fact, I'm thinking, I pulled that too tight now, I'm thinking I might do something similar on one of my eco squares. So this quilt that she talked about had only feather stitch everywhere, just in different colours, but the same stitch. And I think for me, you know, and what I enjoy doing, taking that one choice away, that you're just doing feather stitch, I might like that. So I'm going to try it. So I'm just putting it out there. Right, so now I'm back to the end, and then at the end I'm just going to take one tiny straight stitch just to mirror the start of it there. So now, do you see I've got these two little ovals. I only had a little short seam, but you imagine if you had a longer seam with those shapes going along, I think that's quite cool. And I like to have some variety between the sort of more organic feather stitch and this, which is more spiky and geometrical and so on. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to finish this off. I might keep this same colour since there's so much of it. I didn't talk you through what you need. Sorry. For this stage you obviously need lots of different threads. I've got mostly embroidery threads because that's what I have, but I've also got one or two little pearl cottons. This is quite a fine number 16 weight. And I've got some of these pearl cottons. These are Valdani that are 8 weight. They're much thicker. I've got these in more neutral colours. I think these are more for my Eco one. And also the good old orts. Now I might not use my orts a lot in the video because it requires a lot of time to be pulling them out and, you know, seeing if they're long enough and if there's enough strands of them and so on. But you can use your orts, of course. Yeah, so the next thing I'm going to do is go over my Cretan stitch, which I did up here. I'm going to go over it again with another row of Cretan stitch. Okay, I've got my blue. Back to my Cretan stitch. Something stuck there. So I come up in the gap, and then I just Cretan stitch again, but just lining myself up in the gaps between the previous line of stitching. I'm trying to do it in such a way that you can see what I'm doing, if you need to. I'm noticing that in this velvety stuff here, the stitches are sort of sinking down and disappearing. A little sparrow chirping at me. I think it's a sparrow. I hope my head's not coming into shot. And it gives quite a lovely effect. And also, I'll just do a few more then I'll show you. You create these little spaces in between. You can do the same thing with the herringbone. In fact, I might do that because I do quite like the look of the two colours of stitches overlaying each other. I think for me the biggest thing with this was starting, you know, just pick a seam, pick a stitch and start. And then once you get going you become absorbed by it. This is just how it worked out for me. And then one idea leads to another. Otherwise you're looking at it and you're thinking, where shall I start? I might as well just get to the end because it's only short. And you can put as much or as little as you like, you know? I mean, like that idea of that lady from her vintage quilt that she'd seen about just using the feather stitch all over. You do see old quilts out in a book I've got. I think one of the books I showed you, there's one with only the herringbone stitch all over, I think only in one colour. So you can go from, you know, like I said in the stitches video, you can go from a explosion in a Victorian antique shop down to very simple. So you see here these little spaces now. You've got these little diamond shapes that you've made in between. Well, some of them aren't very diamondy. But you have these little spaces which are just crying out for a bead or a French knot or, you know, a little cross mini cross stitch or just something. So that's what I mean about it's like a springboard. One thing leads to the next. You just need a few stitches in your toolbox to draw on. You don't need many, and I could have shown you 100 in that video the other last weekend, but you don't need many. Let's go over this herringbone also with another colour. In fact, instead of going over this again with herringbone, which would be exactly the same principle as the cretin, you just go in the spaces. I'm going to go over these, you see where the cross is, I'm going to kind of couch that down with a longish stitch, just a straight stitch. So I'm sort of lining myself up on the top of the cross. But, you know, like I said, don't have to be that precise. Do you see? There's a stray thread on it. I'm just going to jump up and down. And just make a little cross bar across the cross. I also found that when I was stitching, I was stitching the other day when the children and my mum were here on my birthday, that I needed to concentrate more than normal, you know? So that's why I'm not talking. Sorry. I'm doing quite big stitches. When I did them on the other piece, this, I made tiny ones. I'm doing them quite big so that you can see them. It's my excuse and I'm sticking to it. So you see, you start with a stitch and then you build on it. And you can just keep going on your piece. This piece is for my journal. If you were making them to join together later into something else, then you see I stitched all around the edge. I did it in last week's video, didn't I? Just to hold all the edges down about 1/4 of an inch away. You don't want to put any thick embellishments or anything into right up to the edge, because when you come to join it they might get in the way of your seam. So if you've stitched all around like that about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, don't put fancy stitching into that area if you're going to make something. If they're for your journal, then it doesn't matter, does it? So there you go. You see I've just added another layer to that herringbone stitch. The other thing is, because of all the thread colours, you keep changing thread. That's why the aughts are a good idea to use, because then you've probably got little lengths of things that you can use up. There we go. I think while I've got this yellow, I'm going to finish it off because it's too far to jump. I think I'm going to go and do something else with it somewhere else while it's in my needle. I think I'm going to do some chain stitch because I haven't done chain stitch yet. I mean, you don't have to use all the stitches, apparently I do. I think I'm going to weave some chain stitch around over the top of this line that I couched. So I'm going to come up here, chain stitch, concentrate. Watch your tension, so many things to think about. So I'm going to just go across a bit, but I'm just, yeah, I'm not drawing around anything, I'm just doing it vaguely curvy. Because the seam, you can either go over it in a straight line, which will emphasize the shape of the seam, or you can not go over, you know, go over it but in a wavy line, or you can do both. You could, here I've couched a straight line and now I'm doing a wavy line. You just have to sort of be aware of what you're doing, assess it as you go along, see if you like it. You can always do something else to it, or, you know, when you come to add buttons and beads and lace and whatever, you can just stitch something over it if you still really don't like it. I wouldn't start adding beads until you've done most of your stitching, only because your thread tends to catch on them, the same with the buttons. I mean, you know, you can do if you prefer to have an area completed, but just be aware of that they are a bit of a pain. Ask me how I know. Whoopsie. Hope I'm keeping it where you can see. If you need to see, you think you know how to do chain stitch. What's also nice is you see the different, the colour of thread against the different background colours. It's nice, but it also is another choice you have to make when you're choosing your thread colour. You're not only choosing what goes with one cloth, it might have to cross several cloths. But, you know, I think with this it's more is more, so nearly everything goes, doesn't it? We hope. And I've also seen them where they've got quite a big patch on of one cloth and then they stitch across that one cloth to make it look like there are seams. That's another option. I'm just going to get one more in there, I think. Oops. There we go, so now I've got my wibbly chain. There we go. You see it's still quite minimal compared to this one that I showed you at the beginning. Quite minimal. And even this has still got space in it. It's knowing when to stop. You know, you stop when you like it. Where's the snippy snippies? There are many suggestions for names for my others that I haven't got here. And I think the winner is Blunty Blunties, or Ms. Blunt, formerly, or something of that kind. There was also Chompy Chompies and all kinds of fun suggestions. But I think Blunty Blunties being the opposite of Snippy Snippies. And the other thing a few people ask me is why don't I get them sharpened, which is, you know, a reasonable question to ask. A friend of mine has got, in England, has got a proper Fiskars sharpener. And she told me that if you sharpen them, then of course it improves them, but they don't go back to as good as new. And there are also in England places I used to teach, you know, quilt shops, fabric shops, where I used to give workshops. There would be kind of people who, scissor sharpening people, who would come around, and then the shop would say on a certain day the scissor sharpening man or woman's there. And they did a much better job. I think they did quite a good job because they had proper professional kit. But there's none of that round here where I live, in deepest, darkest rural France. If I wanted a chainsaw sharpened, or, you know, a plough blade or something like that, I'd have no trouble finding someone to do it for me. But a little pair of Fiskars scissors? No, there's no one. Right, so... But I'm very grateful to Sue for my new Snippy Snippies. So what I'm going to do now with my feather stitch, because I just loved it on there, I'm going to do this same thing. So all I did was on the little point of each feather I did 3 little straight stitches, and then I did a little French knot on the end of the middle one, and it just looks to me like a climbing rose, and I just loved it. So I'm going to do that. So I'm just going to start up here at this one with this bright green. So I'm just, you can't really see because that dark red on there, I'm just coming right down into the point of that feather stitch with a little straight stitch. Maybe I'll make them a bit bigger next time so you can see. And I found it easier to come up a little distance away. I'm not going to put one there because it would go into the seam. I found it easier to come up a little distance away from the feather and then go down into the point of the feather. I found if I was coming up from behind the feather stitch, I was sort of poking around trying to find the right hole. If that makes any sense. That is a habit that I have when I say if that makes any sense. I do think and hope most of what I say does make some sense to some of you. Right, we're into the other colour. Hopefully you can see it better. You see I've come up sort of 1/4 of an inch away from the feather stitch, and then I'm going down right into the point of the feather stitch. And again, don't pull it too tight. And 3. I mean, you know, you can do as many as you want. I just like 3s of things. You see? I mean, it looks cool just like that. You could also, of course, put a bead instead of a French knot if you didn't like doing French knots. You could put a lazy daisy stitch. You could put a little tiny cross. You know, you can do any number of things. But it's just that same principle of building on the seam line stitching that you've done. And the book that I showed you by Judith Baker Montano, I must apologise. One lady told me in the comments that it was $80-something new. I don't know why it's so expensive, or if it was new indeed, maybe it's out of print and it's hard to get hold of. I should have checked before I recommended it. Then another lady had just found it for pennies, or you know, for a couple of dollars, pounds, whatever it was, in a thrift shop. So that was just lucky. There's a website called Abe Books, which I think is worldwide. Is it Abe Books? Where you can get second-hand books. And in France there's one called Fnac. I think most countries must have sort of second-hand books online if you don't have access to a library, or, you know, another way of getting hold of a copy. So I'm just going to do that all the way down. Okay, where I stopped the video, I've just watched it back, I was putting the little green stitches on this line of feather stitch, and then my neighbour thought it would be a good idea to start rotivating his plot of land there. So I carried on for a bit and did some more, and when I watched it back it was really awful, the noise. So anyway, it's now the next day and I'm back at my desk. So I carried on doing the green stitches all the way down, and then I did some little French knots on the end of the centre of each of the 3. You can probably see that more clearly now under my ring light, you know, to represent the little rambler rose. And then last night, in the same vein, so to speak, vein of a leaf, I did this on my eco cloth. So I did feather stitch all over every seam in the yellowy gold, and then I did 3 little straight stitches at the end of every sticky out bit of every feather stitch, 1, 2, 3. I hope it's in focus. And then on the ends in a beige colour, and then on the end I did in this sort of old goldy orange colour a French knot on every one, and I just love that. I want to make 4 of those and make a rice bag. I always want to make a rice bag. So that's an example of just choosing one stitch, and then I've embellished it a little bit. how that would look. So that's an option if you don't like the, you know, crazy look. So that's that one. So I'll carry on with this one now. I think I'm going to do something with the blanket stitch here, similar to what I did on this one. Sorry, it's so crazy, we're all over the place. Do you see here I did blanket stitch, and I did a small blanket stitch, a medium one and a long one, and then I did a medium one and a short one, medium long, medium short, just like that all the way along. And I didn't mirror it on the other side on this. But then on the ends of every other one, every other blanket stitch sticky up thing, I did a lazy daisy, and then in between I did a French knot. So I'm going to do that on my blanket stitch on here, I think, first off. I have done this. Do you see? I got 6 billion needles all threaded with different colours. So we'll see how that goes. Now I have to pick a colour. I thought that might, you know, might be helpful. Let's get all that out of the way. The other thing I've decided is, because I just love this so much, although it was a lot of work, and this one is more or less the same size as this, I think I want to make 4 like this and make a cushion, because I just love them. And also it's a bit big for my journal, so I have got another smaller one that I made that hasn't got any stitching on yet, and I'm going to stitch on this and put it into my journal. So I'll show you that at the end. What I'll do is I'll finish this stitching part of the video, and I'll go away and do that, and then I'll put a little video just showing you that on the end. So this is going to be a bit bitty, I'm sorry about that, but I hope it's still enjoyable and, you know, useful and all the rest of it. So what was I doing now? My little flowers on my red blanket stitch. So I'm going to start with the lazy daisies. I'm going to choose a colour that shows up for you. Let's do this goldy colour and get all my other big tangle of pre-threaded things out of the way. So I'm just going to, on every other one, I think, I'm just planning ahead a bit. Well, that's in the seam, that stitch there, so I won't put anything there. So no, do you know what I might do is I'm going to put a lazy daisy on the 2 long ones each side, and then French knots on the in-between ones. So to do a lazy daisy, I'm going to come up right on the very point of that blanket stitch. Oh, excuse me. Right up on the very point of that blanket stitch, and then make my loop. Go back down through the same point, and then come up however long you want your lazy daisy to be, but make sure you trap the loop of thread under your needle and pull through, not too tightly. You really have to watch your tension with these embroidery stitches, because you don't want them. I'm so used to pulling tight when I do running stitch because I like the way the cloth puckers, but with this you need to keep it roundy. And then you can either just do a tiny stitch over to tack that loop down, or if you want you can do a longer stitch. Maybe I'll do a slightly longer stitch, and then it just adds a little pointy bit to the end of your lazy daisy, like that. So then I'm going to jump across here. Actually, I'm going to do it in the middle as well. Change my mind. I'm going to do it on every other one, I think, basically. Come in right on the point of that blanket stitch and do the same thing again. And when you jump as well, you have to be really careful not to pull it too tight. Do you see what happens? And I'm going to do the same thing again there. And I'm just going to do that on every other spike of my blanket stitch. Yeah, so like I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted by my neighbour, that's a problem with the sunny weather. It brings everybody out strimming and cutting and gardening and all that stuff. And in this village, a lot of them are farmers or retired farmers, and they're inclined to do it all with heavy machinery. So you're sitting outside and it's all nice and peaceful, and then that happens. Now I've forgotten what I was going to say. Oh yes, what I was saying earlier in the video is that it's interesting, or it was interesting to me, what I'm going to do on the other side, I will finish that thought in a minute. What I'm going to do on the other side is do the other opposites. So instead of putting my Lazy Daisy here, I'm going to put it here so it's offset. Do you see what I mean? But, you know, these are just all those little choices you have to make. And I really can't remember my thought that I was going to say. I think it was something about choices as well. You have all these choices, and I think it's just up to you and the kind of work you like doing, whether you enjoy that or not. But to me it was interesting to learn that I much more enjoyed doing that eco piece with the feather stitch all over and so on. So you can take a technique, any technique, you know, any technique at all, and you might look at it and think, oh, that's not for me. But maybe if you tweak it, if you do it slightly differently, if you think a little bit outside the box or whatever, then it could be something for you. So don't dismiss things necessarily as, oh, I don't want to do that. Maybe just try and see if there's another way. I mean, you don't have to do all the things, you know. But it resonated with me a little bit in the way I now do the log cabins, you know, if you're following on Wednesdays, because I used to make those the quilty way, measuring the strips precisely, rotary cutting, you know, machine stitching accurate seams and all that. And I did enjoy that for a while, but then at one point, as I became more, I don't know what's the word, more like I am now in the way I wanted to work, I enjoyed it less. I found it restricting. I think in the beginning I found it reassuring to have all the accuracy and everything, and then at one point that reassurance became a restriction, and so I started doing it, you know, wonky, not to put too fine a point on it, and, you know, the raw edge strips and not worrying if all the logs were the same width and all that sort of thing. And now that's what I enjoy doing, so that's why I'm sharing that with you on Wonky Wednesday. And I know a few people have commented that they're not quilters, they don't come from that tradition at all, and they were never enticed by it, you know, because of their character or the way they like to work or whatever. But they are enjoying the wonky way of doing it, so I'm pleased about that. Right, so that's my rather large tulipy things. I'm sorry. It's actually raining again. I think that was the sun. That was all the sun we were getting. There was thunder this morning and now it's raining. Anyway, there we go. So I just finished that off. And then the next thing I'm going to do is, I'll keep that little bit threaded because you never know. If you do have multiple needles, I mean, I've done it for the purpose of the video, but I do think for me, for the flow of working, if you do have lots of needles, it's not a bad idea to do this. Because then your choice is, oh, which one shall I have? I'll have that one, and, you know, there it is already in your hand. That's just what I like. So I've chosen this darker, sort of an orange, rusty orange colour. And I'm going to do another stitch in the middle of those Lazy Daisies, because I did that on my Eco one, just to sort of fill it in kind of thing. And again, this is embroidery floss. Some of it is 2 strands, some of it is 3. It's basically what came out of my orts. So I've just done one little stitch, one straight stitch in the middle. This is a super long needle, it's not even a tulip, but I was scouting around getting every needle I possibly could. So again, I've said it a few times already, I know, but it's that same principle. You just have to start somewhere. And that was, for me, was using all the stitches along the seams to give you something to work with. Because you've obviously got your piece block already, it's not a completely blank page, and you've got the seam lines. But it's a little bit like if you're a painter or a drawer or a sketcher or whatever, or, you know, you make art sketchbooks. It's that empty page thing, you know. When you do art of any, certainly in mixed media art, they do something, I think they call it breaking the page. So you've got your clean white page, and you scribble on it, or you do collage on it, or you just do something, a layer of something that may not even show in your finished piece. You might end up covering it all up, but it gives you something to respond to, and it takes away that fear of the blank page. And I think we can take that and apply it in our stitching as well, you know, whatever kind of stitching it is. That's why I like the collaged backgrounds. I guess the equivalent to a blank page would just be one plain piece of cloth that you then have to stitch onto. It's taking the first step. So do you see with my little rusty coloured middle, it just gives them, they look like little flames now, which is kind of cool, especially with a little pointy tip on the end. So I'll finish that off. You get a great backstory as well, by the way, because you're jumping around all over the place. But I won't make you sew them in your books upside down, don't worry, after all this work. Oh dear, that would not be popular, I don't think. No, we're not doing that. Well, unless you want to, maybe you want to. But I'm not gonna, and you can't make me. Right, so I'm going to do French knots on the in-between ones. What colour shall I use? I'll use this limey green. In a sense, because I've threaded all these needles, I've limited my choices down to what's in my needles. So, yeah, well, that's interesting as well. So I'm just going to come through on that point there. This is, how many strands have I got in here? I think there's 3 or 4 strands in here. I have to put it down for a French knot, I can't do it in mid-air. So I'm just going to do 2 wraps. So for a French knot, you hold your thread that's coming out of the cloth, you wrap it round your needle however many times you want, 1, 2 I'm going to do, and then you put the point of the needle back in just next to where you came out, like maybe a thread or 2 of cloth away. And once the point of your needle's through, then you can tension that against the needle, not too tight or you won't get it through. Hold that thread down with your thumb and pull through to the back. You can see that's even with 2 wraps, because I had a few strands, it's quite a bold French knot. And I'm just going to do that on all those empty little spikes. 2 wraps and in. And again, equally you could put a bead on there. So if I was going to put a bead there, I would now leave that, go and carry on stitching, and then I'd come back and do all the beadwork once I'd finished the stitching, because it is annoying. I mean, your thread sometimes gets caught around your French knots, but it's even more likely to get caught around a bead. Oops. For me, anyway. So yeah, I'm liking that. But if you're stitching along with me now, I hope you have just started somewhere. And also, it's a journal piece, you know, if you've never done crazy stitching, crazy patchwork, quilting, stitching, whatever you call it, if you've never done this before, this is an experimental piece, so, you know, try not to be too precious about it. I know it's difficult, especially when you're putting the work in. But as always, for me, it's about the process and the learning, and not necessarily or only learning the technicalities of the stitching if they're all new to you, but learning about yourself and what you enjoy doing. And like I said before, how you could alter the process slightly to suit you. You know, and the only way you can really do that is by observing how it makes you feel to do what you're doing. Can you follow that? I hope you can follow that. I think you can. I think you know me well enough by now, those of you who've been here a while. Whoops, you see I just got caught around a French knot. That was okay. Phew. Came out okay. Yeah, I'm pleased I went for the alternate, you know, doing the Lazy Daisies alternate and the French knots alternate. And because the blanket stitch had that wavy line to it, because I did the different lengths, now I've emphasised that with the French knots and the Lazy Daisies. It's given a nice organic movement. There's the O word. It's given a nice organic movement to it. with the sort of spiky structure in the middle. So yeah, I'm quite pleased with that. So let's end that off. I'm just doing a double back stitch on the back. I'm not doing knots or anything. So what shall we do next? Oh, I know what we'll do while we're French knotting. I did that, I know you said, do you remember? Well, for you it was hardly any time ago at all, where I did that double cretin stitch and I had those little diamond shapes that I made in between. I think in every other one I'm going to put a French knot in this dark red. So just in every other somewhat diamond, do you see that one? There's hardly a diamond, but I'm just going to squeeze it in there. So in that space is going a French knot. This is only this is 3 strands as well. I'm going to do 3 wraps though, just for difference. I mean, that's how you can vary up as well, you know, the colour of your thread, how many strands you use, the type of thread, because pearl cotton has a different look to embroidery cotton. When you use stranded cotton, you can vary the number of strands. 2, 3. So I'm just going in every other diamond with a 3 wrap knot, and then later on when I get to doing beading, I'll do a bead in the alternate ones, I think. That's my plan. And I do think I will. I talked about making 2 more like this, finishing this one and making 2 others and making a cushion. Obviously I'll show you if and when I do that. But I am definitely going to get those poor cushions in from the terrace, get the pads out, maybe give them a gentle hand wash and do something to them. And also I will show you when I do that, because I feel bad that I've done that to them. I think they got put out there one summer and they're on, there are 2 sofas out there. Hang on, sorry, I have to make sure I'm going in the right diamond. And it's not the sofa I sit on, and yeah, I just hadn't sort of noticed them, poor things. Two more. And when you've done all the seam treatments, hang on, sorry, 1, 2, 3, apparently I can't count to 3 and talk at the same time. You've also got the spaces to work into, if you want to, you know. So you could do motif type stitching rather than linear stitching. Like I haven't shown you bullion knots, but you can make bullion knot roses, you could make silk ribbon roses. You know, if you're into your embroidery, these spaces as well can have stuff put in them. I did my clusters and my buttons and my, because that's more what I like. Right, so that's those done. But it's not the kind of project where it has a start and a finish, really, you know. It's finished when you think it's finished. And I suppose that's the same with all kinds of, you know, the sort of stitching that I do. Even when I'm doing just running stitch one way and the other, I might go back in between the lines and put more running stitch in. It depends on my mood. It's the same thing. Okay, so that now has got its knots. I don't know if you can see the colours, but in real life that does look quite cool, the dark red in there. I think I'm going to put something, I'm just looking on here for inspiration. Oh yes, pistol stitch. I might do on the ends of some of these cretin stitch bars a pistol stitch, which is a French knot on a stalk. Apologies if you loathe French knots, you don't have to do them. For the same look you could do just a straight stitch and then sew a bead on the end. I'm just trying to choose a colour now. Let's have that emerald green. And it's interesting now I'm choosing colours that I hope will show up well for you. So I'm coming up on this light green point of the cretin stitch there against the shocking pink of my sari, my doubled up sari. And now I'm going to do, I showed you a pistol stitch in the stitches video, didn't I? Yes, I think I did. So now I'm going to do 3 wraps again. And then instead of going right down in the same point I came out, I'm going to jump up a little bit. That is about 3/16 of an inch, 5mm. And then tension in the same way, but then you have to be a slightly bit more careful because you've got a straight stitch as well that needs, you know, you don't pull it too tight. And then you get this little French knot on a little stalk. So I'm going to do that all the way along the green lines of the Cretan stitch. 2, 3, jump up, go down. Everybody's here today. Hans is home this week. You might be able to hear him in the background. He's on the phone. He's working downstairs. Both children are here. They're kind of between their exams. I've finished their exams and their summer jobs. Joey's going to go and work on a campsite for the summer. And Lily's going to work in that famous hamburger chain that's all over the world with the M, because she wants to stay in Bordeaux where she's at university, and with her friends and her boyfriend and so on. So anyway, that's the job that she's got. So they're in between those things at the moment, so they're both home for a few days, which is lovely. Whoopsie. I do find as well with this kind of embroidery that your thread gets twisty. I suppose it's logical because you're doing twisty stitches rather than just straight lines, which I normally do. And then there's the tip of hanging your letting the needle dangle so your thread untwists. It's just a little bit difficult for me to do in the limited space here under the camera. Right, so that's my line of pistol stitches there. And it's again a different, I mean they do look different to here, which is a French knot on the end of a straight stitch. So those 2 stitches are obviously done separately because of different colours, but even if you didn't do them separately, it does look different. A pistol stitch, well mine, the French knot always sits kind of to one side of it. So it looks like a little, I don't know what it looks like, a little thing. It's got a different look. So finish that off. What was the next thing I wanted to show you? I did write a little list because it's a lot to keep in my brain. Oh, I know. Right, the fly stitch. Where I did the fly stitch here. Basically, this isn't a, follow along exactly, although of course you can. This is just giving you hopefully ideas and inspiration, and then you can discover your own things as well. The fly stitch here, which they're done in a line but they're individual stitches, unless you join them up, with straight stitches in between. On one of the pieces I went through again in a different colour and I quite like the look of that, so I'm going to do that again here. I might use this rusty orange again. So all I'm going to do is come up inside this first fly stitch, just inside it, and just make another fly stitch and come out in the V. You see what I'm doing? Quite a thick seam there. Don't pull too tight, just so it lays sort of just inside, and then I'm going to go into just the very top of that straight stitch of the green, just to anchor that loop down. Oops. So it sits sort of half over it, half in it. It just gives it another another look. So I'm going to do that all down that line. So I'm just working inside the previous fly stitch. And then anchoring it you could of course, you know, go over the other stitch as well and that would give another look, but I'm just going to anchor it just, you know, just a small enough stitch just to anchor it down. And it looks like I think it already did look like a little wishbone. You know, the wishbone on a roast bird of some kind. That when you're children, my granny used to dry it for us in the oven, and then we would pull it with your little finger, one each side, and then the one that got the biggest part could make a wish. I assume that's universal. You'll tell me if it is or not. That's what they look like to me, little wishbones. I know some people say they look like little bird tracks. I can see that as well. And I think there's nearly an infinite, I think there probably is an infinite number of things you could come up with, an infinite number of variations. And all the different resources, the books, you know, I'm sure if you Google stitches for crazy patchwork, you'll come up with stuff. I'm sure if you look on Pinterest, you'll come up with stuff. And you can obviously copy things, or you can just use it as inspiration and jumping off points, whichever you like. I don't think there's any harm in copying at all, and even if you do copy exactly somebody, yours will be different because it's done by you. Two more. And then the final thing I did to this line of stitching on my other piece was on the little green stalk of the first fly stitch I did, I sewed a little bead. So again, when I come to doing beads, I might do that again because I like the look of it. And I guess that's how you get what they call signature whatever. In this case, that would be signature stitching. If you find something yourself that you enjoy doing and you like the look of, and then you include that in every piece of work because you enjoy it, that will become your signature stitch. When I was gardening, when I was doing garden design, I had, you know, one had signature plants or signature plant combinations that you used. I always liked Verbena bonariensis underplanted with Alchemilla mollis, for example, or catmint underplanted with Alchemilla mollis, or anything underplanted. I just love Alchemilla mollis. Lady's mantle is its common name. And the Leaves Eco Print, so now I love it even more. Right, so that's that line. So just in there, let me show you here where I've done it already. I'm showing you something. Here we go. Do you see here this line? So my first row of fly stitches were this red, and then I did this apple green in between in the same way that I just did, and then I sewed a little bead on round about the end of the stalk of the red. Oh, and a further thing I did as well, I don't know if it shows up because it's just a darker red, I did a little bar across that line. Perhaps I'll do that. That's now too small. I'll put it back in there. Where are we? Where's my fly stitch? There. So I'm now going to choose a contrasting colour. Maybe I'll choose this brighter red. So even just adding something simple, like a little straight stitch, can add another dimension. So basically what I'm doing is these little bars of the green, I'm turning them into a cross stitch with another colour. You could equally do it with the green. You could have done it when you'd finished your fly stitch. You could go back and, you know, with the same colour of your fly stitch, made a cross. It's just building all the time, just adding and building until you're happy with it. So that just adds another little layer of colour. That one was a bit long, but never mind. While I'm doing this, next Monday will be the 17th of June. So next Monday's video, it's not a big spoiler alert, those of you who have been following along from the beginning, I am going to dig up my bundle. Now that's early because I said about the summer solstice, which is, I think, it'll be the 21st or the 22nd of June. But I thought if I do it in advance, then, and if you want to do it absolutely on the solstice, then I'll have already shown you, you know, how to clean it and do whatever to it. So then you can either go and do yours straight away if you can't wait any longer. I know quite a few people in the Facebook group are chomping at the bit, so to speak, to retrieve their bundles, or not if they're gone. Mine might be gone. Then it'll be a very short video. I'll think of something if it has gone. Sorry, there was someone banging a door. So yeah, so that'll be next Monday's video. So Monday the 17th of June. So that you've got, you know, you've got it in advance of the solstice. And then that's up to you, you know, how much restraint you can show. Okay, so what next? Oh, I wanted to do something in this chain stitch. See, now I've done some, I'm looking back at my previous ones that I've done to see if I like, you know, if I want to repeat something or if I want to tweak it, because I can say, well, I did like that I did that, but I want to tweak it. You see here in the chain stitch I did three yellow straight stitches, and then I did 3 lazy daisies going up, and I do quite like the look of that, but I think it needs a bit more, so I might do that again and then do something else here, maybe a bead or a French knot. I seem to be using a lot of French knots. Yeah, I think I'll do that. So here where I've got this yellow chain, because I've woven it, meandered, you know, wibbled it, I've got little spaces now within the wibble. Within the wibble, you know what I mean. So what colour? Let's have this. See, I was going to go for that dark red, but if I do the dark red here into this patch, it'll disappear. Let's do this. That's the same colour that I did it with. Let's. Blue's already there. Let's do the purple. Let's do the purple. So I'm just going somewhere by eye into the middle of the curve that I created. And I don't mind either if now when I put this little motif in, I end up stitching over my roses here on the feather stitch. But if you do mind, you just have to sort of modify, you know, you don't have to complete the whole thing. If there wasn't space for all 3 stalks and all 3 lazy daisies, for example, you just do 2 stalks or 1 stalk and 1 lazy daisy, you know, just modify it. I don't think you can see that at all, but I'm just doing 3 straight stitches under an angle, sort of 1 straight up the middle and then 2 angled either side, as if it was the stem of a flower with 2 leaves. So there's 1. I'm going to jump. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do it either side of that, I think. Just decided that in the moment. You won't see it on this velvet at all. Many apologies. I can hardly see it, but I don't think it matters. Fred hair. So now I'll do it up here where you can hopefully see it better. It makes like a sort of star effect when it's done both sides. Right, you'll be able to see it now when I do it on this pale bit of linen, hopefully. I'm doing quite long stitches, they're a good 1/4 inch, bit more. Do you see? So because I've got 3 one side and 3 the other, it's made a kind of, you know, starry type thing. So I'm just going to do one more here. I'm going to come up through the couched wall, I think. It really matters. I just push the chain slightly aside so I can stitch down behind it. That you could equally stitch into the chain if that's what you liked. No right or wrong, really. Excuse me. Oops, do that. And then do the same thing on the other side. Come up at the base, just because it's less far to jump. A lady was asking Kelly in the Facebook group, I think, if I remember correctly, about backing them. For our journals it's not necessary, as we've made all our pieces and, you know, we've just left the back, and sometimes we've stitched them with the back showing. But if you want to make an actual thing of some kind, you could of course back them. So then there's different ways you could do that. You could join them all together just with a normal seam. I'll just show you this. Look, do you see that little motif I've now made? Well, that's just 6 straight stitches either side of this chain. So you could join them with strips of cloth, which in quilting they call sashing, which could be as wide or as narrow as you wanted. So if you were going to put these two together, you could either just put them right sides together like that, stitch along there, and then it would all become like one piece, you know. And then maybe you could then go over and do something with that seam. Or maybe then what I would do would be do something different here, here and here, rather than in a straight line, and they would almost completely disappear then, you know. So that would give you a sort of all over look. Or you could join them with a strip of something plain. Have I got something plain standing by? No, not pre-prepared, but, well, this won't go because it's white, but, well, it might, you know. So then you would sew the strip to this patch along there, and then you would put this, and then you would flip that over like that, and then you would put this on right sides together, and then you would sew that to that strip through there. Can you see what I'm doing? And then when you opened it all out, you would have little strips in between. And then you could obviously make these strips as wide or as narrow as you wanted. Do you get the idea? So you could do a super wide strip of, I think, a dark colour on what I've chosen as a colour palette would look good. You could do a super wide strip, and then you could do more embroidery on that if you then wanted to. So for my 4 then, if I made a cushion, I would have a dark coloured cross of plain fabric and 4 individual blocks, which gives a completely different look than if you join them all together. Then you just end up with essentially one big block. I could have, of course, pieced one big block to start with, the size of a cushion, and worked on that. That would be another option. It might be less handy, you know, to work on if it gets too big. I don't know, I've never worked on a piece that big, but that's another option. But then once you've joined them together in some way, then you can just back it with, you know, some kind of backing cloth. I have seen them backed with fine wool, and even pieced backings. So through thrift, you know, if you haven't got one piece of cloth big enough, you can join lots of pieces together. And also then I've seen them tied through, where you make a special kind of stitch and tie a knot, and then you get the little tufts. And you could tie it through to the back, so that on the front all you had was a neutral little, you know, a tiny little stitch somewhere. Or you could piece it all together, put the backing on, and then go and do some more stitching here and there through the layers just to hold the two layers together so they didn't move around independently of each other. So those are the different options, off the cuff and on the spur of the moment. Next year, I've said it a few times, next year we will do a sort of quilt as you go type thing so that people that want to make a quilt can make a quilt, and people that don't want to, I'll do it in such a way that you can make individual things out of the pieces, you know, or you can break them down and make another stitch journal or whatever. I'll try and make it as flexible as possible. Okay, I'm going to go back to my bright red. And then there'll be more about, you know, how to construct quilts and so on. So now I'm going to do my 3 lazy daisies on my purple spikes. Now you see this purple one here is right up against this rose, so I think I'm just going to do 2 lazy daisies. You can now hear Hans, if you speak German, he's saying genau, which means he agrees with the person. I think it means correct or something of that kind. He says it a lot, so that's good. He's apparently, you know, working with people he agrees with, which must be nice. So there's 1 lazy daisy. Come back up in the same place at the top of that purple spike and do another lazy daisy under a sort of 45-degree-ish angle. And then, do I come down here? Yeah, I'll turn it and do the same thing on this, the middle of the purple spike, the other side. And I found it handier to do the upright one first, you know, the middle one of the 3. And then the other 2 at the sides, especially if you've got a cloth with a pile like velvet. You really don't want to pull your stitch too tight because it can sink right down in and you can hardly see it sometimes. So really, you know, if you want it to sit up on the surface, you have to just be a little bit aware of your tension. So let's go this way. That way. The children are both working quietly with various admin-y type things they have to do for their university next year. Form filling. So it's a hive of activity here this morning. So there we go, so there's my 3. And those I've just done a tiny stitch to anchor them rather than the longer stitch that I did over here. You see? So I've got a little 3-petaled flower with a purple stem and purple leaves. So now I need to jump over here. Now you could, if you really were, I'm going to do a jump from there to there. I'm using mostly aught thread and, you know, it's all vintage. None of this is thread that I've bought new. Which, like I said before, doesn't give you, or doesn't give me permission to waste it, no. But I kind of take a view if my jumping is going to use a lot more thread than if I finished off and knotted and started again. And in this case I've decided that jumping is the best way to go. You can also do things like, if to get from there to there, I could, for example, have just done maybe a little running stitch or something alongside my chain to get me over there. That's another possibility. But I seem to be happy jumping, so jumping is what I'm doing. He said genau again. One day I'm going to count how many times he says genau in a day. I know he's shouting. I don't think, he doesn't shout because he's angry. He shouts because he's going a bit deaf, so he doesn't realise how loud he's talking. Which is why am I whispering, because he can't hear me anyway. And he doesn't watch my videos, so. Oh, Joey, bless him, said that he's taken to, when he's sitting working, putting my video on. Maybe I shouldn't say this in case the YouTube police are watching me. Putting my video on and letting, or, you know, a video on and playing, letting it play with the sound off, just while he's busy writing his essay or whatever he's doing. Isn't that sweet of him? He does always go through and give me the likes, and, you know, he's subscribed and everything. Although it's not anything that remotely really interests him, but it's nice that he supports me, and Lily too. Because it does help enormously, the, you know, the thumbs up thing. I do greatly appreciate it. Come on. There we go. I'm hoping I've got enough thread to finish all of these. Otherwise I'm going to have to go diving for another bit of red, which is another tip. If you're working out of your orts and you want to make sure that you've got enough thread to finish a whole line of whatever, you have to sort of be sure. Or a couple of places I've found a thread that was close enough because I couldn't find the same. Because I've only got this short bit of thread, I am going to end off. There's quite a big jump to the next place, and I'm already not sure it's enough. Really not sure it's enough. Is that some more there? Yeah, that's some more the same. Oh, that's also a short bit. What about that bit? That's slightly longer. Let's have that bit. 2 strands. I don't know why there's all these short bits of this red. It's possible that it's come out of the big messy tangle I've got over there in a box that was given to me, that I go pulling big fistfuls out of every now and then to top up my orts. No, of course I can't thread my needle. Come on. In you go. Try the other end of the thread. There is an end usually to threads that thread easier. And when you're pulling it off, and that was it. And when you're pulling it off a spool or a hank of floss, it's obvious. But when it's gone in the orts, it's not. It's trial and error. Right, where was I? Over here. So, 3 lazy daisies. Whoopsie. He must be in a meeting because he's talking too long for it to be a phone call. There, you see, where I came back down, I was slightly farther away, and it kind of made an ugly end to my lazy daisy. So I just pushed it in with my needle, and now where I'm going in to make my next one, I'm just sort of locking that in place. That's like getting really pernickety. I'm just telling you in case you also want to be pernickety and do the same. Am I going to get 4 more lazy daisies out of this bit of red, or am I going to have to get yet another little bit of red? The tension, the suspense I mean. I think I might just do it. I think I might just manage it. It's nice to see as well how, you know, I talked about how that can affect your choice, choosing your colours, that it has to cross several patches. But it is nice to see how the colours change. Ooh, it's tight. It's tight. How the colours change in relation to the background they're sitting on. Am I going to manage? Cross your fingers for me. One more. Come on. Come on, little thread, you can do it. Right, come up in the right place. I would do all I should do, as my granny would say. Oh dear. Trouble is, you need a bit of slack to be able to make your loop. Let's do it like this. We've all been there, haven't we? Oh no, don't unthread your needle. Trying to squeeze one more stitch out of thread that really is too short. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and go in one movement over my loop and through to the back. Yes, did it. Made my stitch slightly longer than it should be, but... And then on the back, I'm going to go backwards slightly, and then I'm just going to weave it forward a few stitches just into the backing. And that's how I deal with thread that's too short. And then I just hope. Okay. So, what was I going to do to those? Oh yes, I was going to put a bead or something at the base of them. And what else did I want to show you? I think for that stitching that was it. So I'm going to do some beads now. Actually, am I going to do some beads? No. Well, let me just do a couple. I think you can all sew on beads. But let me just do a couple just in case. And then, now, the top tip when sewing on beads is to make sure that you use a needle fine enough. It sounds logical, but how many times have I tried to... I've taken a thick needle, not thought ahead, and it won't go through the eye of my bead. So that's why I say it. I'm going to use this mushroomy darning thread, one strand of it. So I like to use, there's invisible thread that's polyester that you can buy for beading. It's got a special name which I can't remember, but I don't have that. So I just choose something fine and a neutral colour. And in my case it's this vintage darning thread, which is sturdy enough, and I use it for piecing. It's still strong. Otherwise I would just use a regular fine sewing cotton in a neutral colour. See, sturdy. So I'm going to put some beads just in those little red flowers I've just made. So I'm going to anchor my thread first. I'm going to come up through the back. I'm just going to do a couple of back stitches just to anchor my thread, and then I'm going to come up where I want my bead, which is right down at the base of these three lazy daisies. Make sure yeah. Sometimes I anchor my thread somewhere and then come up somewhere else, because when I've turned it over my brain has forgotten where it was. Right, like so. And then in this tin I've got all kinds of goodies. I've got some Suffk puffs type things that I'll show you in a minute. What colour bead do I want? And I've got a selection of beads just thrown in here willy-nilly. Let's have these slightly bigger green ones. So I just get it on my needle, just let it fall onto the thread, and then I just go in just next to where I came out, and then gently and slowly and carefully pull the thread through. Make sure it doesn't loop or twist, and then and the bead wants to lay flat, and I want it to lay like that. So fiddle about with it till it lays how you want. And I might then, because that's quite a big bead, come up again and go through it again from the opposite direction, which usually, hopefully, has the effect of sort of pulling it so it stands up straight. This is if it's important to you how your beads lay. Do you see now? Do you see I'm pulling on the thread now and it's standing up straight, it's not laying flat. So that's coming out from opposite sides. And then on the back I'll take another tiny stitch, just a little back stitch. So that bead is now anchored all on its own, and now it's laying back where it shouldn't be. It's okay. So now I'm going to go over to this one, come up from the back and do the same thing again. And I find it's handier to have, well, it probably would have been handier to have them all separately in little shallow containers that you can get your needle into. But I just wanted to put them all in this tin. So I had them all in one place. So I just chose the beads that I liked and my Suffk puffs and some buttons that I liked for this project and put them all in there together. This green bead is a bit bigger than the other one, but it doesn't matter. So that's sewing on beads. So I'll do the other 4 later. I'll end that off because I want to show you the Suffk puffs, which are known as yo-yos across the pond, I believe. But in this side of the pond, well, I don't know what they call them in French, but in English, British English, we call them Suffk puffs. A Suffk puff basically starts with a circle of cloth, and you want a fairly fine cloth, although I have seen them made with lace and things, and I haven't got around to trying that yet, but I would like to. And then the traditional, well, the proper way of doing it is to, you need a sturdy thread and a good knot to start with, because you're going to gather, so you don't want the knot to pop through. I probably wouldn't use this cotton, it's a bit fine. In fact, I use this. This is some machine cotton, satinized, so it's a bit thicker and sturdier. I'm going to use some of that. And then basically all you do is, I won't do a whole one, but I'll just show you the beginning of it, if you don't know. The traditional way, you know, I call it a traditional way because then when I do it a different way, non-traditional sounds edgier than saying this is the proper way and this is how I'm doing it, i.e. not the proper way. But anyway, I'll show you both. The traditional way of doing it is to turn over. Your Suffk puff will end up slightly less than half the size of the circle that you cut. So this circle I drew round a jar lid. Looks to me like it's about 2.5, 2 3/4 inches across. So that will end up about 1 1/4 inches across the finished Suffk puff. I think, have I done one? Yeah, there we go. That's one that started life like this. Do you see? Maybe I should move that out of the way. So this size circle ends up with this size puff. And then what you do is, excuse me, you turn in a very narrow little fold of seam, about, certainly not 1/4 of an inch, about 5 millimeters or 3/16 of an inch. And then you do fairly even and small running stitches. Make sure you're not secure and you can pull on it. And then you just work your way around, folding it in. This is how I do it. There may be other ways. Doing your running stitches as you go. And I gather as I go. I don't leave all the gathering to the end. I find it's more even if I gather as I go. So you just pull it in. And if I end up with little pleats like that there, I try and work them in, but I don't worry too much about it because by the time it's all gathered up, you won't really see. And you can kind of push your little seam allowance into place with the point of your needle as well. So you just do that all the way until you come back to the beginning. So I shall cut that because I can undo that and start again. I've hardly started. But what I've been doing is, because I know I'm going to do this to them, put buttons and cover them and everything. So the only interesting part for me really is the sort of outside edge perimeter of them. Do you see? So I thought, why not do them raw edge and not mess about with folding over seams and all that malarkey. So that's what I did. So apart from this one, which I did properly, all of these, do you see? It's raw edge in the middle. And I don't even mind the look of the fluff if you're going to use that like that. And I found it a lot easier, and I'll show you with this bit of purple. So I did exactly the same thing, only I didn't fold in. So I just did a line of running stitch, made a sturdy knot again, and just did a line of running stitch all the way around about 5 millimeters or 3/16 of an inch from the edge of the cloth. This was a slightly smaller circle to start with. I drew round a smaller jar lid, I think. But just anything that's circular, you know. Just draw around it with a normal pencil. Cut it out. It doesn't even have to be that neat, because by the time you've gathered it up, you don't see that it wasn't a perfect circle. And certainly if you're going to sew buttons and beads and things over it. So I just go around loading a few stitches at a time onto my needle. I wouldn't have used this yellow thread, by the way, for this colour cloth. I just want you to be able to see I would have used a darker thread. Because you hardly see the thread, but you might as well try and match it as best you can. And as you go, you just push it in. Do you see? Basically, you're making a little mop cap, I wore a mop cap when I was a bridesmaid with my cousin Paula. I think we were about 7 or 8, something like that. I just remembered. Her elder sister got married. She was the youngest of 4 children. And she was, there's quite a big gap between her and the next sister up, but it was her eldest sister's wedding. So her eldest sister was 20-something, and my cousin Paula and I were 8 or 9. And we had lilac satin bridesmaids dresses with little white lace pinafore aprons and a white lace mop cap and a little basket of flowers. There are photos somewhere. I don't know where. There must be. Anyway, so what you're making is a little mop cap. So I've come round, I'm sort of a stitch length away from my knot. I'm going to trim the tail off a bit because that's too pokey outy. And then when you get there, I take that last stitch, be careful not to go through the knot, but I come up just next to it or just before it. You don't want to go past it or it'll stop you from gathering. I hope you can see just before that knot I've gone through to the right side of my circle and got tangled around the circle, of course I have. Right, and now I do my final fiddling and gathering. So I gather it up and then just sort of fiddle about with it. Get the thread hair off it. Just fiddle about, with the gathers. You see there, you can see my yellow stitching. Get it as central as you can if that's important to you. And once you're happy with the gathers, just pull up the last bit. And then because I knew I was sewing it onto something, I just then put my needle straight through to the other side. Made sure on this side that I was happy with it. There's a few little thread strands that will fall off, and then that'll be that. No more will fall off. Made sure I was happy with it, which that's quite a nice shape. Turn it over, and then just on here, just make a couple of little back stitches to anchor my thread. And that's it, and that's how I did it. And I sat and made, all those. Okay, so that's a Suffk puff. So then, now I've made that, let's put some on here, which I wouldn't do until I'd finished everything else, but that's going to take me many hours. Get rid of that. So to sew that on, actually I'll have that needle back. I might arrange first a little cluster of them. Let's see what else I've got in here. And I did like different sizes together on that one that I did earlier. So here I've got 2 different size Suffk puffs. Here I've got 2 different sizes, and then another one just over there. So I like that purple one on there against that lighter coloured background. So then I just sort of audition them, how I like them. I want to cover that yellow bit of stitch that I've got showing there. Do I like that dark one, or would I like... No, not that one. So then again, it's just fiddling about. I think I like that dark one. I like this green one. So just, sit and make a few if you're going to get really into this. Oh, I quite like that green one. Sit and make a few in colours that you like, but make a variation of darks and lights and bright colours and dull colours and so on. And then you've got them ready to go. So I think I'm going to do those two, and I'm going to do them sort of like that. And I'm going to keep them well away from the edge of my piece because of joining the things together. And I'm going to get that bit of neutral thread back and get the end that doesn't have a knot in it. Oh, come here. Ah, do you know what? I can now smell onions cooking, which means one of the children is making something for lunch. How wonderful is that? That I don't have to go downstairs and wonder what's for lunch. Right, so I'm going to sew the purple one on first because that's the one that's going behind. I'm going to start here somewhere where I know I'm going to then attach the green one, so my thread ends up in the right place. I'm going to come through from the back and just into the very, very edge, just catching 2 or 3 bits of the, oops. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do an anchor stitch on the back first. My backing cloth's so fine and that silk's so fine it just pulled straight through. I'm just going to do a couple of little back stitches on the back first, or one back stitch, and then come through. There we go. Oh, the other thing I might do is, I've got this little lacy thing. I might trap that behind. I don't know if I want all of it. I'm going to just take this bit of it. It's crochet lace, so it's possible that it will start unravelling, but it's going to get stitched on so heavily that I don't think that's going to be a problem. So I'm going to put that there, and then I'm going to put that there. And then as I come around I can adjust it with my needle and push it where I want it. I need to keep my thumb there, apologies, because otherwise it just won't stay put. But I'll show you. So I'm going to come through behind my Suffk puff and take just maybe 2 or 3 threads of the cloth, and then I'm going to tuck my needle just in under the very edge. I'm basically doing a plié. I am doing a plié, but I want my stitches to be as small and invisible as possible. So I'm just taking my needle and putting it just behind the Suffk puff into the background cloth, jumping forward about 3/16 of an inch, and then coming up again into the Suffk puff. So here I want to push my lace into place. I'm just going to push it in like that. Make sure it's how I want it. Maybe just like that. And then just stitch through everything in the same way, trapping my lace. You could, of course, if it was too much fiddling, stitch your lace on first, you know, under where your puff's going, and then stitch your Suffk puff over the top, but I'm choosing to do it all in one go. There we go. I'm just going to go all the way around back to where I started. Okay, so I've finished sewing the purple one and I've sewn the light green one just in exactly the same way, and now I've chosen these buttons out of my tin, and I'm just going to sew that one there. I'm just going to use embroidery floss. This is 3 strands, I think, of this dark red. So I'll just come up through behind my Suffk puff, and then, you know, if you liked that fluffy bit of the puff showing, you can leave it showing and sew your buttons to one side. Maybe I'll do that for a change. And just sew them wherever you like the look of them. If I can find the hole, there we go. Only just sew it on, you know, it's a 2-hole button, so I'm just going to sew it over and over like that. If it's a 4-hole button, sometimes I sew it with a cross, so I just think that looks nice. And you could even then, if you wanted to embellish that further, sit a bead on top of the button. It's probably good enough. And then in between there, what I did on here was then I put some beads of different sizes, and then I did some French knots as well. And on this one here, I did some beads, different shapes of sizes, and then some French knots coming down, and then I had these long cylindrical beads, so I stitched some of those coming off there down through this patch, and then I sort of echoed the shape and colour of those by doing these granitos stitch, which I didn't show you in the stitches video. I have shown before, but I'll do that I think here as well. So I'll find some other beads while I've got this bit of thread. So you're just really embellishing it, you know, just as much as you want or as little as you want. Have some of these bigger black beads. So I've started with buttons, now I'll do big beads, and I'll work my way down to small beads. And these I'm just going to do them with one stitch each. Oops, sorry, I headbutted you. Trying to get in my bead tin. Another big bead. And I like that sort of waterfall effect, if you like, so I try and stitch them in a meandering type way. And I also like to try and vary the space between them, rather than have them evenly spaced, which is easier said than done. Very hard to be random. There's 3 of those, let's have 5 of those. And go up here, so I just come up where I think, dive in for a bead. That one won't go over my needle, so I'll leave it out, otherwise I'll keep picking it up again. There we go. So there, so now I've got 4, I wanted 1 more. Let's put it over here somewhere onto the lace. I might just have enough thread. So that's some big beads. And I'll just let them lay how they will. I don't think I'll end this thread off. Get another thread. Whoops. And now I'm going to do some small beads. I'm going to get a smaller needle because that was, the eye of that needle was too big. So you're just, you know, working away, seeing where you think, seeing what you've got in terms. Oh, that's Lily's ring in there. I must give that back to her. I found it on the floor the other day after she was here for my birthday because she had to go back to move her stuff from her old flat to her new flat. So she borrowed the car and went back to move. And I found a ring on the floor. See, that's a longer one. And I put it in there for safekeeping. I must go back to Lily. It was too small for my fingers. Otherwise I would have kept it on my finger. I'm just dipping in, picking up whatever. These will show up better on this purple. And I think you get the idea. I'll just do one more. There's a few French knots and more importantly a couple of granitos stitch in case you don't know what they are and you fancy doing those. Let's have this, this is some of that Valdani. So I just think it's nice to have the round shape of the beads and then the round shape of the French knot to echo that. I will in a minute do it on the light green so you can see, but I'm just going to do a 2-wrap knot because it's quite thick thread. And I make sure that I'm sitting up on the pleat of one of the puffs and not in the groove, if you see what I mean, because otherwise it'll disappear. Let me come over here onto this. I'm just doing French knots, you know how to do those now. And even the French knots you could do some 2 wraps, some 3 wraps, you know, you can vary the size of them. And be careful not to get your thread caught around the buttons and beads. You could of course do the French knots first. But then you'd have to sort of negotiate your way around them as to not covering them up. That's why I did it this way, with your buttons and so on. I did a 3-wrap one, so I'm just weaving those down through as well, just thinking sort of waterfall effect. 3-wrap one there, and then I'll do a granito stitch or 2 on the actual background cloth. You see already, just with those few bits and bobs, it's starting to take shape. And I think it's nice to carry the stitching on into the cloth because it sort of anchors it in its place rather than it looking like it's a separate thing that's been plonked on. So I will do more seed stitch and beads going onto the cloth. So for a granito stitch, you take a straight stitch of whatever length you want it to be, and then you come back up in the same place where you came out, like that. And then you take 2 more stitches through those same holes, but you lay them either side. So the first one I'm going to lay to my right, so I go in the same hole, back up where it came out, but then I keep my thumbnail there. Try not to tangle your thread. I keep my thumbnail sort of over the middle stitch as I pull through, so that the stitch on to my right falls sort of down my thumbnail and lays to the side. Do you see what I mean? And then I put my thread over to the other side and do the same thing for a 3rd time, but this time I don't need to come out again, I just dive straight down through, and but I hold that loop now to the left. So, and you end up with that. It's like a little seed shape, or a grain of rice. We did them on the Kawandi, I think. Do you see? Granito stitch. I think it's very effective, and it makes a different shape to the seed stitch, but they play nicely together. So I hope that is, you know, enough, more than enough to get you started. There will be some editing in this video. I will do it as carefully as I can so as not to detract from the, you know, the overall. And I will go and work on my little block for my journal, and I'll come back and just do a little extra few minutes showing you when I've done that, putting it in the journal. Okay, so here's my finished block for my journal. There's the sun coming in. So I did a cluster up here, the same as before, with buttons and beads and French knots and granitos. And then I did a little yo-yo here, just with a button and some lace. I put beads in among the stitching everywhere. And then this long sort of strip up the side, the purple and then the pink here, I cut a piece of lace and just stitched it on with a couching stitch, and then I just did a line of feather stitch along the edge of the swirly lace. So that's my little block that I'm going to put in my journal. So here's my journal, ready open. I think I'll do it this way round, or this way round. Don't know, this way around I think. And I'm going to stitch it along here, along the top. So come through from the back of the cloth. Excuse my arm, but I have to hold it. Oopsie, I don't think it needs a dangle. I think there's enough going on without a dangle. Well, this is not a good needle either. Never mind, I shall persevere. There we go. Whoops. It's quite thick to stitch through. So I hope you enjoyed this. It's quite an involved project. I think it's going to take, well, it's going to take a lot of time. Depends how much you do, of course. You could do minimal stitching like I did on my eco square, or you could go crazy, or anything in between. But it was interesting to do it in 2 parts. I couldn't think of another way to do it. Well, 3 parts really, if you count the stitching video. Whoopsie, I've torn my paper now, I felt it come through. I shall turn it and do stab stitch. It's really tricky now, right in by the spine here. Those of you who haven't sewn your signatures in yet probably had the right idea. But I like to have the finished book, even if it's awkward. There we go, I'm through. Well, I say I'm through. I'm nearly through. Excuse me. That's it, now I'm through. There we go. So that is week 24. In effect it was 23 and 24. Those of you who made the journal the same as me, we've now sorted out the missing page because there's 53 Mondays in 2024. There we go, snip that. Got the blunties here, but they'll do the job. So all I'm going to write, and I can find a pencil, which I did, oh here's one, which I did not prepare, but luckily there was one, is we are the, no there's no point in looking at the date from last week, we're the 10th, yes of course, we're a week after my birthday. So we're the 10th of the 6th, 24, sign it, K3N and a kiss. And under here I'm just going to write still crazy after all these years. And then I might write, just for myself, 59 trips around the sun. I spelled around wrong. Okay, still crazy after all these years, 59 trips around the sun. So there you go. That was my birthday craziness. I hope you enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing some of you, at least on Instagram and in the Facebook group, sharing your creations. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to joining me next time for more cloth tales. Bye bye!